Welcome to the Research Works podcast. My name is Dr. Dana Poole and I get the privilege of bringing to you a very special series this week. I am here in Slovenia at the European Academy of Childhood Disability, interviewing the researchers and presenters about their work. This is very exciting and I can't wait for you to delve into this whole research conference series. We hope you enjoy the series. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our conference series in Slovenia at EACD 2023. It is bright on a Friday morning and I have the wonderful Dr. Stacey Cleary here. Good morning.
Good morning, Dana. You're very perky.
It is quite early in the morning. We've only had one day of conference and I always feel like by day two, you're like, okay, we can still do this. We'll see how we are on day three, but day two is like a
there's a lot going on.
We're going good.
I haven't had my morning coffee yet, so that's...
We'll make sure you get your morning coffee very, very soon. Well, I'm thrilled that you come by to have a chat to us today. You had your presentation yesterday and it was all about participation. So your presentation title was The Experiences and Perceptions of Participation in Daily Life of Adolescents and Young Adults with Cerebral Palsy. A scoping review. I mean, I love every single word that you put in there.
Quite a mouthful, isn't it?
I feel like all of our titles are mouthfuls.
It's like how much information and detail can you fit into one sentence?
Exactly. How can I pull people in so they get all the components of it?
Keywords.
But obviously this work represents like a whole team of work, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so your main affiliations are through CPAchieve, fabulous group of researchers there. Absolutely love you guys. Murdoch Children's Research Institute and an honorary at the University of Melbourne. So really well connected there, it seems.
I work in an incredible team and I feel like I repeat it often. It's just one of those sort of pinchy moments. It's just a really, really generous and encouraging team.
Yeah, and I think that makes those environments encourage and breed good research, don't they?
Absolutely.
And it's those collaborations that make it worthwhile in terms of the end game of what we're trying to get to. And I feel like we've spoken to Professor Christine Imms many times now and once on the podcast, and she often talks about participation not just being an ends but a means, and I love that whole messaging. And when I saw the title, your title it draws people in, and I think that's a really important factor. There's so many things there like young adults with cerebral palsy. Even just saying that means that we need to think further ahead. But why is it that you got into this area of research in the first place? I'm really curious about that story.
Oh, that's a great question. I think I probably grew up in a family that really valued inclusion of all people.
That's
and
awesome.
Just had that understanding that disability and sickness were part of life, but also so was support and care. And I think I'm probably someone who, when I choose work, it's values driven.
That's
so
great.
I'm a physiotherapist and I've always worked with young people with disabilities.
Yep.
And when the funding for CPAchieve came through and this postdoc position came through, I had my second daughter and she was quite young, and I just thought, I've got to do this. I guess
it was one of those opportunities.
Yeah.
It's one of those things I love talking about, when your values align with what it is that you get to do. Of course it's work because, you have to research, you do all of that, but it resonates with you so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the perspectives are important.
It's not a drudge to go to work. It's working for something that you feel is important.
That's so cool. That's cool. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, tell us a bit more about this actual, the presentation that you did yesterday now. What was the main aim? What was the main purpose of you performing the scoping review? Because that's a lot of work.
It is. And I have to say it's a really big team effort. I think there have been a number of reviews looking at more quantitative outcomes of participation or just general experiences of young people with CP, and we really wanted to explore the participation experiences and the perceptions of this really critical phase of life, this young adult phase. So the main aim really was, well, there are a couple, but to identify the literature that was out there. And to, I guess, collate those experiences. And then we wanted to really understand specifically what the barriers and the facilitators, I know there are such overused words, but everyone knows what they mean, to participation are in this life stage. And I guess when we're saying participation, we're talking about those really key life situations of young adulthood.
Sure.
So like education, employment, relationships, healthcare, things like that.
Yeah. And we sort of try to tease it out in terms of attendance and involvement as well. Like, is that how you sort of framed what that participation
That was part of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Right. So we used that definition of participation, and studies needed to look at participation, I guess, experiences, qualitatively, quantitatively, and with that lens of attendance or involvement.
Yeah. And is that why you chose to go down the path of a scoping review, just to sort of broaden, the kind of studies that you could include?
That's a good question. I think scoping reviews can be really useful when you don't quite know what's out there, the lay of the land.
Yeah.
And we didn't really know the lay of the land. Like, we knew that there were a few papers describing experiences, but we wanted to know the lay of the land. And we weren't looking to produce like clinical guidelines, I guess, which is something more for a systematic review.
Yeah. And why did you choose experiences?
I think just we wanted to know how young people with CP were experiencing, how they were feeling, what their perceptions were, what their reflections were on this stage of life. There's measurements that tell us about their reduced participation quantitatively, but not how they feel about it or how they feel about their interactions in those situations. So that was really key for us, is understanding that period through that lens.
I love that you've done that, because when you look at that lovely family of participation-related constructs, and it's the experiences, that's such a key element. I mean, we can all relate to it, right? If we experience something positively, we're more likely to go back and do it. But if we don't, we're less likely to, and then there's more barriers. So I'm really interested now, what kind of studies did you find? Like, what was out there?
Yeah, well, we included 34 papers that covered 32 studies.
Okay.
They were mostly qualitative, so I think 17 of those were qualitative, and predominantly, so 20 of those studies gathered data through individual interviews.
Okay.
They were mostly, I think, actually all Western countries. So Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, America, Sweden, maybe one each from the UK and Ireland.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And were they sort of experiences following an intervention in particular? Or?
There were a couple like that.
Yeah.
There were a couple that were looking at elements of, I guess, the experiences in particular life situations.
Sure.
Like some of them were healthcare or eating with friends.
Fabulous.
So some of them focused on particular life situations. Some were a little bit broader.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And I don't think I've really seen many articles like really specifically on this. It's so great that you've done a scope and review where you can start to pull that out now.
Yeah.
So what did you actually find? What were the main themes that came through on this?
That's a really great question. So we came up with this idea of the overarching theme being claiming my adulthood.
Wow.
So I guess from reading the papers, the young adults already knew who they were, and they already had a strong sense of identity, what they valued, what they wanted to participate in, and how they wanted to be supported across the life situations.
Wow, okay.
And we found that the participation experiences in the different life situations were fairly similar, except for healthcare and disability services. And that was the focus of my presentation yesterday, given the time limits.
Sure.
It was just that element that we focused on.
Oh, okay. Talk us through more about that. I'm so curious about that. That's great.
Sure. So I guess big picture, we looked firstly at how preferences were developed, and then we looked at how I guess those interacted. So young people's preferences for their participation in healthcare settings were predominantly developed through their time in the paediatric healthcare system, and that came through really clearly.
Wow,
but I think what was also really clear was that there was this really strong development of preferences as young people move through adulthood, which is expected, but it looked like different healthcare needs and different healthcare wants during this time. And there was a little bit of tension in this with the young people and those involved in their healthcare. So predominantly their parents and their healthcare providers.
Wow.
So young people talked about parents who they really trusted and loved, but maybe not stepping back to make space for them to develop their autonomy.
Wow.
And healthcare professionals perhaps not taking the young person's desire for increased autonomy and collaborative decision-making seriously.
Wow. This is such... I mean, there's such big things there,
I know, and
aren't
I've just said it in 2 sentences, which doesn't really flesh it out, right? But that's the overall.
There's a lot to digest there. Like you think about what the role parents have, and they spend so much time looking after their children, and that whole process of giving them that space and autonomy is a really tricky one.
Absolutely, and I think the word tension really just worked for that.
Yes,
it was still a loved and trusted person, but it's just this changing dynamic, which, I mean, that happens for young adults and their parents across the board, doesn't it? It's
for sure. Yeah,
and it's complexity
that trust, knowing what's actually out there and available services to support their young people.
Yeah,
to be looked up. No one will ever look after them or support them as much as their parent will, and we know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was the development of the preferences.
Okay.
Would you like to know what the actual preferences were?
I would love to know what they are,
So the preferences for health and disability services for young adults with CP were for respect, for informed choices, for collaboration with the healthcare providers, for expert advice, and for centralised communication. And
Those
I think
are great topics,
aren't they?
I love that.
And I think you can see some of the reflections from the paediatric services and how that was developed. Yeah.
That's incredible. So what does this mean? Like how can we take this information now and move it forward and act on it, I suppose, right?
Well, we looked at the themes beyond that, and we mapped them to the family of participation-related constructs, which is such a really beautiful construct.
It is,
and it was really quite overwhelming. The environmental elements for the participation experience of young people in these healthcare settings, they just dominated, and they were all really... They were all really negative. So it was things like there were insufficient services available. There wasn't a lot of guidance to navigate these really complex new systems.
Right.
The systems were burdensome in terms of energy and psychological cost. Was felt that autonomy wasn't supported, and all of these things combined to make the environment unacceptable, really, for young people with CP, which was really...
That's pretty confronting, really,
It really was.
Yeah.
And to add to that, then we mapped the context. So the context that these young people are experiencing the healthcare sector within is with their trusted supporters. And with their trusted supporters, they often encountered... a lack of knowledge around CP and the issues that face adulthood, questions of intellectual capacity, things like that. And then once they were in the sessions, they found providers with insufficient knowledge. And, that's such a change for them from paediatric services and misconceptions of disability, things like that.
And looping back to that sort of tension again, like we're talking about, having someone who knows you so well to help you and go into a space and advocate for you, and I can imagine how all of those factors really relate.
Absolutely. So once we actually get to the participation element of attendance is so reduced because of those reduced services at the structural level. And then young people found that their involvement wasn't taken seriously when they were in sessions. The onus was on them, but they had minimal support. And it's a bit of a shock, really.
So where to then? What can we do?
Well,
what are your main thoughts?
So firstly, this is part one of our scoping review, right? So we will touch on other elements of life, and so I'm just talking about the healthcare and disability services. And it was so wonderful talking to Emma Livingston from the UP CP movement and hearing her keynote yesterday. Like, they are working on that context, on advocacy and on changing perceptions of disability and service provider knowledge. And I know that there are other people working on that too. So I think, really intervening both at that really high level, structural level for actual availability of services, but then really, I guess, changing attitudes about disability and perceptions and increasing the training that's available for staff.
And I think there's some really practical things there, because there are sometimes when you come to these areas and you can see like there's a lot of barriers, it can be a bit overwhelmed to go, how do we tackle this? And it's wonderful to hear about organisations who are already set up trying to do that work. But on a practical level for clinicians, all our children we work with will get older and become young adults and become adults. And so even in our language and how we can provide support and making sure they're heard and the topics you spoke about already, we can keep them in our forefront when we're chatting to families too, right? Yeah,
and even just, I know it's difficult at that really, organisational level, but being in contact with our colleagues in adult services and engaging, look, it's really complex, but I'm really encouraged by how much is happening.
That is so wonderful. Awareness. So wonderful. Well, congratulations on this work. Congratulations on presenting this information and having your oral presentation yesterday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure to join you.
Great.
I'm going to get my coffee now.
You've got to grab your coffee now for sure.
Thanks so much.
That's absolutely wonderful. So remember, to all the listeners, just head to our website if you want links to this. But we're going to keep interviewing people all through the day, even more information around this area. And I think we're just going to keep building and support our knowledge translation from this amazing conference so far. So thank you once again, Stacey.
Such a lot of fun. Thanks, Dana.
Lovely. Thank you. And I'll chat to you all guys again very soon. Bye.